Hey, everybody. It's Dana Robinson on my Thursday morning office hours, and I have brought co host Jim Wang, longtime friend, colleague, who is a serial entrepreneur and just a wealth of wisdom, the kind of guy that could communicate a lot about his experience and does with a lot of his content creation, teach people a lot about more than entrepreneurship, which I think I have some interesting observations I want to ask Jim about because he's kind of a finance blogger. Welcome to my office hours, Jim.
Dana, thank you for having me. This will be a lot of fun.
For anyone who's watching the live stream, you can pop into the comments. It should show up in our software. We're using StreamYard, which syncs with LinkedIn. And so if you're seeing us there, shout out, say hi, or ask a question. We're happy to answer prompts that come in. And we've got some other questions that have been just fed to us from my project management team with questions that come from my audience. So the first thing I want to do is get just the oral history of Jim Wang as the entrepreneur. What were you doing when you became an entrepreneur, and what was the impetus, and what's your story through that first journey and then beyond?
So today I write about personal finance on a blog called Wallet Hacks, but I actually got my start in another personal finance blog, which I started on the side when I was still working. So go back to early 2000s. I graduate college with a computer science degree. I go work in the defense industry. And this is, if you can remember early 2000s, after the dot-com bubble had burst. Computer science degrees were hot in 1998 to 2002 when I was in college, and in 2002 it was hard to get a job. And by then, I actually got a job in defense working on radar systems with Northrop Grumman, and it was there that I started learning about money more seriously as an adult. Because when you're in college, it's like you do a little like TAing here, you make a little extra cash, and then you spend it on beer and video games and whatever else like stuff. And so when I started working and learning, like, oh, it's a 401k, they're IRAs, you have to invest in the stock market. And this is, remember, 2001, the bubble had just burst, and all the like excitement about, tech companies and all that just left like a weird taste in my mouth. So it's like, all right, I really got to learn about investing, saving money, and, preparing for retirement because I don't want to work for, 80 years. And as part of that, I thought, well, why don't I start a journal? I started a personal finance blog because WordPress had started growing. I was like, oh, I'll just start a blog, write a journal, share it with me and my friends. And it was actually, that was the sort of seed that grew into my sort of my entrepreneurial journey, to sort of mix up the metaphors. And I just kind of fell into it by accident, doing something on the side, which I think is a great way to like, they talk about side hustles and things like that, but like, I always view entrepreneurship as like you can't really predict what's going to happen. Like you look back on a lot of things in life and you don't know which decisions are going to become the things that sort of catapult you. But for me, it was just sort of doing this as a lark on the side and it growing way bigger than I expected.
So you're doing this thing that at the time, I mean, blogging. I feel like there was a time when they said that everyone wanted to start a blog, and I don't know if that was like '05 or something like that. And there was like a blog a second being launched, but of course
Yeah.
people start a blog, then they don't know what to write about. It's a big ambition. So yours, it sounds like, maybe stuck partly because it was for you. You're
Mhm.
prompting yourself and journaling and teaching and writing what you're learning about as your own kind of thought exercise. Do you think that's what made yours keep going, or did you have some other drive where you said, oh, this could be a thing?
The start of it was certainly reading these articles that were written by, CPAs and people that were well intentioned, but they were writing for probably themselves or for their peers, and they were hard to understand. So it would take me such a long time to understand like how a 401k worked that I was like, all right, I can write this in ordinary words that people don't have to fight through to understand. And I would share it with my friends, and then they started getting it. And then more importantly, they would tell me where I would get things wrong because I wouldn't get everything right because my background isn't in sort of in finance. And over time, it just sort of grew and grew. And it was the time when everyone was starting a blog. And it, you know, you have to have a reason to keep doing it. And for me, it was both I was still learning it. So I wanted to just write it down and so I didn't have to read the IRS webpage again. I could just read what I wrote, sort of refresh it. And then part of it was I was getting good feedback from my friends telling me like, "Oh, this is really useful. Thanks for doing this." I'm like, "Oh, awesome." And we would just like talk about it some more, and through that, work through it. I think you have to. It's hard to write for another audience. Like it's easier to write for someone that you model as yourself. And so it was like a journal and it wasn't work. And so I never saw it as something where I needed to make money or have it produce anything other than for me to learn, which I got out of the act of doing it. But as it grew and I got more search traffic and social media and things like that, it gave me feedback. We put on I put on AdSense, which is advertising platform from Google. And over the course of the next couple months after I started it, maybe I think 8 or 9 months, I made $100. And I remember when it would make $1 a day, $2 a day, and I was excited because this thing that I started for fun started actually generating. Now, I was making cents per hour, fractions of a cent per hour. If you were to look back on it as time, the value of my time in doing this. But since I didn't view it that way, it never entered my mind, and so I was never discouraged that for 9 months it made nothing because I didn't expect it to make anything. My feedback was my friends was actually it was when my parents would send it to their friends' kids who like didn't understand money. And I was like, oh, this, word of mouth, like you're often not there until it's like your parents and then they want to tell you they told so and so. And that's like really gratifying because you know, helping people on the internet is great, but helping someone that you actually know is like very rewarding. And so I just sort of leaned on that as the fuel to keep me going.
That's great. I see a lot of today's, I'll call them influencers. They seem to be focused on their personal brand. So it's like, I run a bunch of companies. Here's my tweet about the 8 things that I do. Here's my morning routine. I, was you were your own avatar, as well as the people around you, where you're like, well, I'm writing so that I can read this and communicate these ideas, and basically those around me, my friends, my sort of personal social network. And I don't know, from what I've read from your old articles, they never seem to be about Jim Wang. Um, do you think that was an asset or a liability?
It's hard to say. I think inserting personal stories helps build a connection with the people that read your content. And I try to introduce more stories and more personal aspects in what I write today. And so, while I don't think it hurt, because there are plenty of big content businesses that you don't know. There's no like personality necessarily behind it. Like you can go to like a nerd wallet, and it isn't. They have writers, but the writers aren't sharing like their personal connection with whatever subject that may be. So I don't know if it hurts, but for influencers and people that are building a business in which you're trying to build a relationship with your audience, sharing personal stories is extremely important because there are so many influencers, like they need something to connect with you. And if you don't share any stories, the only default is they connect on some other thing that they find. Maybe shared interests, maybe simply gender, maybe it's something else that they see. They like the clothes that you wear. And I mean, that's fine, but it's also very tenuous. Whereas if you share parts about yourself, connect with people connect with people. They don't connect with brands and influences and things like that in the same way. So I think it may not have hurt, but it didn't help. I would, if I were to go back, I would put more of like my not necessarily personal details in like my family or whatever, but like more of me and like my upbringing and things like that.
Interesting. Okay, so and even that's a little bit different than the people that are their whole persona is kind of the braggadocious, like you
Mm.
should follow me because I'm I've done this thing that you wish you could do as well, kind of a thing.
Sometimes that feels very performative. Like they think this is what people want, or they model after other influencers that seem to
Hmm.
get popularity because they're, bragging about their cars or their houses or like some other, you know, I don't know, trophy
Yeah,
that they think people celebrate. And sure, I suppose that works. That connects you with a certain type of audience,
right.
but I would argue that that audience probably already has their models that they like the
True.
people that they're following. And so you're just you're another one. And if that's you, great. But if you're faking it to
Right.
try to attract, then it's like, well, you have to separate the public you from the private you, and that's like a little, I don't know, it feels not icky, but it feels weird.
Yeah, I'm actually doing reading right now around brand transgression, the idea that the different levels of I'll call it punishment that come from a brand that doesn't live up to its promises in one way or another. I think there's huge risk when you're the brand. I mean, some people, take Anthony Robbins, can survive, brand transformations where they fall down, and then they make the falling down part of their story. They can
Hmm.
bounce back and continue to be the guru. But so when you actually got to sell that first business,
Yep.
so you built this thing, didn't revolve around you to some extent. I mean, my outside observation is maybe that not being tied to you and your personal image probably were an asset to your ability to divest that asset and hand it to someone else. And then you've picked up and done it again. So talk people who don't know you through the building to a point of exit, and then what's come after that.
So the first site was called Bargaineering, and it sadly no longer exists. But I built it. I spent about 5 years between when I started it, 5 or 6 years when I started to when it ultimately sold. And I I wasn't anonymous, but the name Jim Wang is fairly common. There may be over 100,000 Jim Wangs in the world. And so it wasn't anonymous, but I did share a lot about myself. I probably had one or two photos like on an about page, but it wasn't like every article had my face. And so on some level it was tied to me, but the tie was like very loose. And also when we sold it to at the time a publicly traded company, and the amount was like awesome, like amazing for me, significant for me, but for them, not so significant. For them, they viewed it as just another line item on a P&L, which meant that the risk of removing me was less to them than I thought. And so in 20, I believe it was 2010, we sold it, and I just kind of worked as an employee for a little bit, and that was a weird transition. The day selling a site, selling the business that I'd spent all these years thinking about, waking up, being excited. Like that next day, I woke up, I was not excited, which was a very odd feeling because you'd think that someone that just got a wire transfer would be really excited about the day after, but it was very kind of a letdown because you took something that you were super excited about now, kind of like left. I imagine our kids are very young, but I imagine it's going to be that same feeling whenever one of our kids goes off to college. And like in the morning, that responsibility that you were like, oh, let's make breakfast, let's see how they would, like, is just gone. It's kind of like an emptiness. And so I felt that, but I couldn't do anything in blogging and personal finance, which was sort of the area that I knew very well. So I started a few other businesses, which were all fine and taught me a lot about entrepreneurship and the internet. And then I got back into it 2015. So now 8 years ago, which is shocking that it's been 8 years, that I got back into it with the new site. And it's you say serial entrepreneur. I never when I graduated college, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get a computer science job. I'm just gonna work my way up into management. Maybe I'll manage people, do projects, and then I'll retire, and then I don't know what. And starting two starting one personal internet site of any kind, right? Business of any kind was already like not in the realm of imagination, but starting two and then a couple smaller businesses in between was certainly not ever on a path, which is why I said you don't know what the decisions are that lead you up to the point, which ones are the big ones. And so you just kind of experiment and see what happens.
Hmm. So, were you able to do this reiteration, similar business model? Obviously, I'm thinking in my head, 5 years gets you past a non-compete. So you're, in a position to kind of take what you've learned, take another run at it. Do What are some of the key things you think you learned that you've done differently in this one?
The tooth, one big thing is with the first site, when I had gotten it big and never intended, like it was never my plan, there was always in the back of my mind a fear that I could mess it up and it could go to zero. and like I would just got the lottery ticket right in my hand, and I'd somehow lost it or like set it on fire or done something stupid. And so sometimes you do things with a bit of caution that really the realities of the situations don't require you to. And so with the second crack at it, I think that fear is now gone
Mm.
because with the sale of the first, it's sort of the financial future risk has largely been minimized. And so now I can treat this, I can move a little bit faster, not make decisions from a position of fear or like worry or unknowing. And then the second one is just be a little more professional about it, like hiring a team earlier.
Mm.
In the first site, I had some freelancers. I never had an editor. I sort of did it myself, which was fine because I didn't have kids. I had very few responsibilities. And so I had the time to do that. Now, years later, there are so many more demands that hiring a team forced more discipline on myself so that the time I was spending wasn't wasted. And just to have more fun with it because there's less of a burden that it has to be like a massive success or anything like that.
I think that's a great observation. That's the you've de-risked by selling that first business, and then gives you the freedom to take the lessons, but then to kind of take it all in stride and be a little less panicky about every dollar
Yeah,
that you spend as you build a team. You're spending your cash flow, right? You're saying, well,
yeah.
I'm investing in the future here, and you
Mhm.
might not have done that in iteration one.
Yeah, and I think I don't know the subject is about entrepreneurship, and I think back to when I started the blog and had no expectations. I had a full-time job, so I had no expectations with the blog. It didn't have to make money. I could test. I was in the early years of the blog, like I was also operating without fear
Hmm.
because there was nothing to be afraid of. And I think that's a great way as an entrepreneur. If you are working a 9 to 5 job and you have these ideas, it's fine to like try a little bit, you know, put a little tester ideas out there and try to run with it, see which ones grow, and then spend time. I always hate the whole like, oh, you got to burn your bridges, so and so set their boats on fire. It's like,
Yeah,
no, that's ridiculous. You should never burn any bridges. Bridges are fine. People leave them alone. Like, test your ideas a little bit here, a little bit there. And the ones that show a little bit of promise, now you can go a little bit more. But don't quit your job to start this.
yeah.
You know, there's always something you could do a little bit just to like feel it out. And when you are in sort of in the trenches of that idea is when you're going to be learning a lot and growing a lot as a person in that uncertainty, and you'll figure out how it can grow, but you keep that paycheck so you
Yeah.
don't have to worry about your rent or your mortgage or where your food's going to come from or how you're going to fill the gas in your car. Like,
Thanks. That's great, and it's a good segue for me to self-promote. I've got a new book coming out called The King's Fly Swatter. It's a business parable of a slave boy in ancient Babylon who gets the worst job in the world. He swats flies behind the king, and eventually he gets very good at it. And then his mentor says, "Now that you do that well, I'd like you to start listening to everything the king does, and come back and talk to me about it." So he mentors him through becoming very wise by extracting more out of his job than is expected of him. So in the book, I don't talk about the fact that while you have a job, you de-risk your entrepreneurship, which is important as a point you just made. I don't really talk about the fact that your business then has a little bit more flexibility, your ability to think, am I doing the right thing? Could I just kill this and try a different thing? Because you have a day job, you have the sort of safety net that you're provided versus the kind of Shark Tank myth that you need to burn the bridges, burn the boats, stop everything you're doing, go all in on something, fail fast, lose all your money, lose everybody else's money. Like some of these are, sort of Silicon Valley myths that might work for people with lots of money and in a different business model than your life, and your money, right? Um, the I heard a quote that said entrepreneurs create wealth. They're very good at creating wealth because they're risk takers. Investors preserve wealth and are often not very good at creating it. You're bridging the gap of both. I think you've got some insight. I'd love an observation because your both your wallet hacks and your previous kind of blog, you focus on normal people and their approach to finance and saving, investing, understanding money, and preserving, right? Slowly building and preserving wealth is a tactic of a very disciplined investor. And entrepreneurs tend to have this kind of risk it all, belly up to the table, throw it all in. And, there's high chances of failure. But the wealth created by that kind of risk when it works is outsized. They often say that the entrepreneur, who has one or two successes is going to lose all of it on the third one, because they'll think they're invincible after a couple of big hits.
Yeah, I I think the attention paid to entrepreneurs, especially VC backed and all that, that only that only focuses on one aspect of their financial life. Like, you don't know if this entrepreneur that just started some company that got funded $3 million and something, like, they could have a nest egg, or they could be married to someone with a full-time job. And so the whole idea of an entrepreneur risking it all for this and that, like, makes for a really interesting, like, news story. I'm not convinced that it's at all as common as it's made out to be,
Hmm.
right? Because you still, like, there's an anxiety that I think everybody feels if you don't have the money to pay for rent. And I don't think you can make good decisions in anything, let alone in, some startup, if you're worried about those sorts of things. And so, yeah, I think we need entrepreneurs because they push the boundaries. And you have entrepreneurs that are the VC backed ones, and you just have the folks that are opening up a restaurant in your neighborhood
Mhm.
that are, sort of the quote unquote sweaty startups that aren't like the flashy ones that aren't going to get, VC backed funding, but you are probably going to have a greater impact on their community than a lot of the other than the startups. Yeah, I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, it's very important that you have your financial house in order so that you can make decisions not based out of fear, right?
Mm.
Like I said, the latest blog, I could make decisions without worrying about anything. When I started the first one, I had a job. I wasn't worried about the money aspect of it because that was all taken care of. And so, you know, are investors wiser and safer? I mean, investors can make bad choices too, and investors are the ones that back the the entrepreneurs, the VC backed entrepreneurs anyway. So I guess my whole point is there are stories that are perpetuated in mainstream media because they get eyeballs, and I think that in part they're not telling. They're not telling the whole story, and two, they may inflate certain aspects of it.
Mhm.
And I think it's great we have VC backed startups where only 1 out of 10 will succeed, because when they do, you end up with the Ubers and the Facebooks and these companies that have, OpenAI transformed and will transform our lives, hopefully for the better. And yeah, without them, progress is much harder. But I I don't think that's the only path towards entrepreneurship, nor do I think investment is this, like, boring, safe alternative in all cases.
I love that. Well, the question I get a lot, I somehow, I think partly because I have courses on LinkedIn Learning that are, which is an ecosystem which is largely people with jobs, is sort of like, how do you bridge this gap from being an employee to being entrepreneurial? And in some cases, some people never want to leave their job. They just are too risk averse, but they've got ideas, they want to do something. Um, in keeping that avatar in mind, somebody who has a job, is entrepreneurial, might want to do something entrepreneurial. I mean, I think you're a good model, so maybe you've already given the advice, but think of that person. What are some things that you would tell them to consider as part of that, walking on two rails?
So it's two things. Like, a lot of my friends still work at Northrop Grumman, right? And they love it there because they like the company. The company was great. I enjoyed my time there. Uh, they enjoy the mission and they enjoy the projects that they get to work on because these are all like massive projects. And So the ones that are entrepreneurial, they find ways within the company
Mm.
to sort of scratch that itch. They go on, proposal bids, joint teams that do the proposals to sort of win new projects. And there are always ways, depending on your company, like those opportunities may not be there at, say, I don't know, if you work at a laundromat, like you're not going to bid on new business necessarily, but there are ways that you can find it within your work if you want to scratch that itch and you don't want to leave. And then the alternative is if there are no opportunities and you want to scratch an entre I wish this word were easier to
I
say.
know, me
Given
too.
how given how often I say it. Like you can find ways outside of work that I think that you can test try. Like all those stories of the Shark Tank, oh, this person made like cookies or jams or whatever. They didn't start at a manufacturing facility making thousands of them. They did it in their kitchen, right? I know
Yeah.
in Maryland there's a law, I think it's called like the cottage food law, where like as long as it doesn't require refrigeration, and it's like a baked good, you could make it. You don't need a license. You could sell it at the farmers market. You can go to the farmers market, ask for a stall. It costs like $10-15 a day, and then you start your business. And the farmers markets are all on the weekends.
Yeah.
So if you have this thing for baking, you want to make some pies, make some cookies, make some jams, you start there. People try it. If they come back and buy more, all right, you have yourself a good product. If they don't come back, that's your feedback. And that's all you have to do. And it doesn't have to become big. You could just do that, make, I don't know, a couple $100 every weekend when the weather's nice. And now you have a few $1,000s each year that
Yeah.
you could invest. You could be a boring investor, put in the stock market. It's totally fine. Or you could spend it because, I mean, it's your money. Do whatever you
Mm.
want. But it scratches that itch. You still keep your job. You're still focused on your job, which for most people is sort of the main engine of their income, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like you have this great car in your garage, and now you're focused on your bike. You're spending all this energy on your bike. It's like, okay, you still have this car. Maybe focus that, and then scratch your itch by riding around the neighborhood every once in a while,
Yeah.
and
I
then
love that.
maybe
That's fantastic. Because you wrote the forward to it, I have a sort of pithy book on side gigs with a particular methodology because I think side gigs, maybe side hustle is a bad word because it implies harder work than a real job, but a side gig is fantastic way to make extra money that you can do whatever you want with. And some of those turn into the magical thing that becomes your business like yours. And they have I think there's a new bad rap coming from the gurus of business that's like, why would you do a side hustle? You should go all in. It's back to that kind of it goes against the grain. But you got a great job with great benefits at Northrop Grumman.
yeah,
That's why
benefits are
would you give
huge
that up
too. Yeah, benefits
if
are
you
huge, especially
yeah.
you got a lot of kids. You got such responsibility. It's like it's hard to give that up, which is partially why it's there. But
Yeah.
still, it's
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then the entrepreneurship's actually next week's office hours with guest David Meltzer. For anybody who's watching this now or catches it between now and next Thursday, I've got a guy who's got a method for thinking about your job as an entrepreneur and not necessarily taking that outside the business environment. I think you spoke to that. You can channel that energy at companies that are good at identifying that,
yeah.
and then you get excited to do those things. And certainly those are good training ground for entrepreneurship, because if they let you take on a project and they go, it's their money, and you swim, you'll flourish and you'll teach yourself. You get to fail on their dime, and of course they might not like it much, but you'll learn some lessons. And big companies should be great at identifying that type of talent and figuring out how to channel you if you've got that itch.
They'll also teach you probably. Like one of the
Mm,
hardest things about entrepreneurship is managing a team. If you've never managed a team before, it's a learning curve.
yeah.
But if you are doing it inside your job, there are other people there that are good at managing teams. You can learn from them, and it's an easy ask.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I was at an organization where they tried really hard to promote people into management. The real problem with that is sometimes people are really talented, but they're missing the gaps in their skills. You want to run a business, you need to own a P&L like this. Like if someone says, "I'd like to be the ops manager. I'd like to be the general manager. I'd like to be a COO." These things require that you do something that is not available to you at most even director level positions. You manage, a budget given to you. You don't own the P&L. So pacing through a good company that says we're going to train a manager gets you to a point where you get to own a P&L. Now you can own a business. At that point, I think you've gained the people management, the financial management, the responsibility and ownership. A lot of those tools can be extracted from a job. And some people might get there and go, hey, this is actually really good. I like doing this with someone else's money. I'm not going to do it on my own. But it certainly give you something to take with you when you leave that job and go out on your own. That a lot of us didn't have. I didn't. I mean, I don't know if you like you got to manage a P&L and manage people, and you had to learn that in like what did they say? The boy raised by wolves.
I don't even know if I'm managing a P&L today.
Yeah, if you've hired people, you probably are. But again, it's a simple one when you don't have accountability to report out to your shareholders. But it's certainly you go ask for shareholders' money, they expect you to report back like you own a P&L.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, Jim Wang, thank you for joining me for this Thursday's Office Hours on LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning. And anyone else who's been watching this, connect with me and Jim Wang, both of us, of course, on LinkedIn. You can write questions for future episodes at hello@danarobinson.com. And Jim Wang, do you have a newsletter subscription for Wallet Hacks?
Yeah, if you just go to wallethacks.com, you could there's a form right on the homepage. Enter in your email. Love to hear from you. Or just email me, jim@wallethacks.com.
Love it. Thanks so much for coming on, Jim.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks a lot.